Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our program this evening. My name is Helen Liu, and I am the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Carey Library. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the Carey Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like tonight's event to you. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat and we will answer them at the end of the program. I will also post a link to the evaluation form, so please take a moment to share your thoughts about this program. If you are interested in purchasing a book, I will include a link from our friends page to Bank Square's books. Our friends receive 10% for every book purchased. And if you are interested in receiving a signed book plate by Weina, please email careyprograms@minlib.net and we will take care of that for you. And I will put all that in the chat at the end of the program. I am delighted to introduce our speaker. Weina Randel is the award-winning author of 3 historical novels, The Last Rose of Shanghai, The Moon in the Palace, and The Empress of Bright Moon, a historical duology about Wu Zetian, China's only female emperor. Weina is the winner of the RWA Writer Award, the Goodreads Choice Award, Best Historical Fiction Semifinalist, and the RT Book Reviewer's Choice, Best First Historical Nominee. The Empress of Bright Moon series has been translated into 7 languages and sold worldwide. Welcome, Weina. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you so much, Helen, for the introduction. And thank you so much to Carey Memorial Library for having me. This is very exciting for me. This is my first event in Boston, and I'm super excited. Now I'm going to show you some slides. I'm going to share the screen here. So here, share. Okay. So, as Helen mentioned earlier, I'm the author of 3 historical novels, The Last Rose of Shanghai, The Moon in the Palace, and The Empress of Bright Moon. I'd like to tell you something about me. And I was born and raised in China. I'm an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 24. And I lived in Texas for almost 20 years. I went to Texas Women's University for graduate school and got my master's degree there. I married a wonderful man and I had 2 kids and I raised them in Texas, and then now we all moved to Boston now. I have a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. My 12-year-old is a 7th grader at Clark Middle School. My 15-year-old is a sophomore at Lexington High School. We moved to Boston about 3 months ago, and so far we love Boston here. I personally love the school here very much, and I also love the walking trails in Lexington. I even like the weather here. I know, snow, it's a big deal for me. I don't usually see them very often. And I just went out jogging in snow this morning. It was cool, but it was fun. So my first 2 novels were published in 2016, and I had my book launch at Crow Museum in Texas. It was a magnificent event, and many friends came over. And this is what you see. They came over there, and that was the book launch at the museum. And since then, I attended many events. I attended many book club meetings. Was here. That was hosted by my neighbors. And I went to lots of talks in museums, and also attended the ceremonies for the Rita Award. And this is the statue that I was holding. And I also hosted another award ceremony for Rita, and I actually hand out an award to Kristen Higgins. She was amazing. She was an awesome writer and a lovely person. So my books received some attention from several publications like Los Angeles Reviews of Books, HuffPost, and the Wall Street Journal. And recently, China Daily's editor sat down with me and we talked about The Last Rose of Shanghai, which was an exciting moment for me. That was my first time to appear on China Daily. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the book Last Rose of Shanghai and how I started out with this novel. Like I said earlier, that I am an immigrant. Before I moved to Texas, I lived in Shanghai for about 5 years. I went to a college there, and after the graduation, I worked there. The place was in Hongkou District, and I often pass a red brick building with Chinese characters on it. It says Moses Church. So at that time, I thought it was just a church, but now I know it was actually Moses Synagogue. But you know, in Chinese, church and synagogue were the same words. I remember passing that red brick building, and I also remember I heard many rumors in Shanghai. They were saying that during World War II, many Jewish refugees actually went to Shanghai and they lived in that area. And after Pearl Harbor, many Jewish refugees were left alone. They did not get any support from the wealthy Jews in Shanghai. They did not have support from the government. They were not able to understand the language. They couldn't find any jobs there. And after Pearl Harbor, they were left all by themselves and they were on the brink of starvation. But I heard the local Shanghai people, they actually throw some loaves of bread into the alley to feed the Jewish refugees. Now, you know, I can never tell if that was really true or not, but the rumor stayed in my head and it stayed with me for many years. Even after I moved to Texas, I still remembered it. So fast forward to 2018. That was 2 years after I published my novels, The Moon in the Palace and The Empress of Bright Moon. I was looking for looking for a project to write, and I went to a book event with a friend. And I remember the book event was Lilac Girl author Martha Hall Kelly's event. I read the book and I loved the author. And after the event, my friend and I were talking, and she said, Weina, you needed to write a story about Jews in Shanghai. And I was like, why? She said, well, you're going to host a bar mitzvah next year. You might as well do it. And you actually know about Shanghai too. And after I had this conversation with her, I thought that would be a very nice gesture because I do wanted to honor my family's Jewish heritage. So that's how I get started to write The Last Rose of Shanghai. And next thing I did was to do research. And boy, Shanghai in 1940 was such a mess, let me tell you. This map was hand-drawn by my son, Jay Randel. He actually did this for me so I could put this on the slide. So thank you so much, boy. And it's kind of hard to see this because, like I said, Shanghai was a mess in 1940. Let's start with this area, the circle, old city where the heart is. This is the area where Chinese actually lived. And move to the left side, which is called French Concession. This is where the French people lived, and you would see many villas, many French bakeries in the area. And if you move up to north, where the roses are, you will see the international settlement. That's where the British and Americans and other Germans and Dutch people lived. But there were also many local Chinese living in this area. In this area, you would know this is what we call it now, the Bund. You will see many European style buildings, Art Deco buildings, and Gothic buildings in this area. And here I wanted to highlight one building which is called Sassoon House, also later called Cathay Hotel, and later called Peace Hotel, and now it's called Fairmount Peace Hotel. Up to move to the north, here you will see Hongkou District, where the red dot is. This is where the Japanese set up the base when they took over China, when they took over Shanghai. And on this side, it's called a designated area for stateless persons. And you will see the Star of David over there. I'm going to get into that part of history a little bit more later. Here, this curve is called the Huangpu River. And on this side, it's called the Putong. And you will see camps for Americans and British. And I will get to that detail later too. So the point is, in 1940, Shanghai belonged to people of many nationalities. Shanghai did not belong to Shanghai people. And the government had fled the area because prior to that, in 1937, Shanghai was attacked by the Japanese. And basically, Shanghai was under the Japanese domination. However, because of French concession and international settlement, the Japanese were not able to attack these two areas. Does that make sense? Okay, I hear nothing. Okay, so now we have, okay, let's go back to that divided area. We have French concession, we have old city, we have international settlement, and we have Japanese. Approximately, I would say in 1940, it's estimated that there were about 8,000 Britons, 2,000 Americans, and another few thousand Russian Jews in Shanghai. And now you're going to ask, why Russian Jews? The Russian Jews fled to Shanghai because of the Bolshevik Revolution, and they had no place to go, so they fled to Shanghai. They actually fled to the north part of China first, and then from there they went down to Shanghai. But additionally in Shanghai, there were also Germans, Italians, Dutch, French, and people of all other nationalities in Shanghai. So with all these people crowded in this city, how did everything go? One thing I can tell you is the segregation was not a law, but prejudice was rampant like a disease. The foreigners and the Shanghai people, they stayed away from each other. The Chinese usually look after the sick families at home, and the foreigners went to hospitals, and the Chinese dined in the courtyards, and the Europeans drank in the coffee houses, and the Japanese, of course, dined in the restaurants with tatami. But I have to say that there was some upper-class Chinese, they did socialize with the foreigners, and they engaged in business dealings with them, like the female protagonist in The Last Rose of Shanghai. But mostly, some low-class Chinese were employed by the British and Americans as servants and cooks. And overall, they live together. They are like salt and sugar that should not be mixed. So this was one observation. The main character in The Last Rose of Shanghai observed the Chinese and foreigners. They were like salt and sugar that must not be mixed. There were some conflicts between the foreigners and the local Chinese, but nothing major as far as I know. So what does Shanghai exactly look like? We have the map, we have the divided areas in Shanghai, and we know there were about 8,000 Britons in Shanghai and 2,000 Americans in Shanghai. And how was Shanghai really look like? These are pictures taken by Sir Victor Stenson. The pictures were taken from 1937 to 1939, right after the Japan-Sino War. So on this picture, this main big picture right here, you will see all this kind of boats, sampans, cruisers on the Huangpu River. It was a very busy river at that time. And I also wanted to let you know there were 3 major warships on that river. There was one British warship, the British HMS Peterel. It was scuttled later. And there was an American warship. It was called the USS Wake. And the Japanese warship, Izumo. There was no Chinese warship because the nationalist government was not able to afford one. That's why they lost this battle with the Japanese. And you will see all these buildings right here. You still see the devastation. And this is the picture of the Chinese, local Chinese. They lined up on the street waiting for something. And you can see they were holding blankets and children, more blankets, and some baskets of food. They were all refugees, Chinese refugees, who fled from the north to Shanghai because at that time, China was still at war with the Japanese. And on this picture, you will see those Japanese soldiers. They were wearing dark clothing with helmets and, of course, guns. And they were searching the Chinese civilians. Each time the Chinese tried to enter a place, they would be forced to be searched by the Japanese. And this picture, I kind of debated whether I should put it there because it was bloody. However, when I was researching China, Shanghai during that period, it was frequently mentioned that on the streets, dead bodies would just be here and there and left for people to see. And it was difficult for me to imagine actually Sir Victor Stenson took a picture of that. Who was Sir Victor Stenson? He was a major figure in Shanghai in 1930s. And this is a picture of him with 3 women sitting on the couch, dressed in his suits, happy. And this picture was used with permission from SMU University, and I'm very grateful for that. Sir Victor Stenson was a British Sephardic Jew of Iraqi origin. He was the heir to a massive business fortune that started with opium trade in China. He was considered the richest man in Asia in 1930s. He was also called a playboy. He was always surrounded with women, and in 1940 he was 59 years old but still a bachelor. He loved 3 things among others. First was money, and the second was women, then photographs. He also owned about 18,000 properties in Shanghai. His famous buildings include Broadway Mansions, Embankment House, the Metropole Hotel, Cathay Theater, many shops and transportation companies, and of course his most proud edifice was Sassoon House. So I'm gonna show you the Sassoon House. Does it look familiar? If you look at the picture on the right, you might see, oh, I think I've seen it before somewhere. I don't know. But this is one major building on the Bund in Shanghai. And this picture on the left was the picture in 1933. And it was called a Cathay Hotel, Shanghai. The building was built in 1929, I think. And it was a very impressive Art Deco building. You can see all these floors. And here I wanted you to pay attention to the balcony. It's called the Sassoon balcony. And you will see a lot of parties were held there and many celebrities attended over there. And this picture was taken in 2019. It's more glamorous. It's owned by a different company now, a Canadian company, Paramount Peace Hotel. But the building is still a landmark in Shanghai. So Sir Victor Stenson actually lived inside this building, and his building was his room was called the penthouse on the top floor right there. And he was very proud that many celebrities came and stayed in this hotel, and Charlie Chaplin stayed in this hotel when he came. And in 1970s, Nicholson came to China and he stayed in this hotel also. Sir Victor Stenson was very proud about his penthouse, and he boasted that in his penthouse he could have a 360 degrees views of the city. He also boasted his bathroom because it had 2 baths, and he used to say that I like to share my bed, but never my bath. Now, let's go down to the next slide. These are the pictures that I took. Excuse me. When I went to Shanghai in 2018, I had to do some research about that. So I decided to go to Peace Hotel to have a dinner there. And this building is actually across from the Peace Hotel, and it was built in 1906. It was also owned by Sassoon, by the way. This is the entrance of one of the entrances of the Peace Hotel, and you will see the words here says Victor for Victor Sassoon, but I don't know if you can see that now. Once you enter this, you will see the grand entry refurbished by Paramount Peace Hotel. It's a beautiful, glorious atrium. And here is the hallway inside the hotel. Many films actually took place in this hallway. And this is another front door, entrance door of the hotel. And of course, as somebody who was fascinated with the period, I took a lot of pictures of artifacts. Next, we're gonna talk about jazz bar, because one thing in 1930s that Sassoon was very proud was the jazz bar. He invited many bands, American bands, Philippine bands, to play in his jazz bar. And here you will see, when I arrived there, it was about 7 p.m. and it was early, so nobody was there. And the band, you will see they are kind of in the 70s and 80s they were playing. It's kind of fascinating to say that because this was the same band that played in the jazz bar for almost 50 years on and off in the hotel. And those people are in the 70s and 80s. I thought it was very impressive to me. And this is the bar. Here are more pictures of me in front of the hotel. And this is the iconic picture of Putong. And here is me standing in the Sassoon balcony, the balcony that I mentioned to you earlier, where you can see the Art Deco building style. When the manager of the hotel took the picture, he was very intent. He had to make sure the flag, Chinese flag, was in the picture, featured prominently. I thought was interesting to know. Okay, so I talked about jazz bar, and I don't know if you ever wonder how did jazz end up in Shanghai, and how was it fictional? But actually, Shanghai, jazz was very popular in Shanghai in 1930s. Because of the Great Depression, many American musicians traveled to Shanghai to make extra cash. One of the musicians was Buck Clayton, and he performed in bars and nice clubs in Shanghai, in the settlement and French concession. And he worked with the local composer called Li Jinghui. Li Jinghui, infused jazz into traditional Chinese folk songs. So he created a new music called 时代曲, which is also called the music of the times, and it reached the height of popularity in Shanghai in the 1940s. Nowadays, you can still hear the music on the streets in Shanghai, in movies, such as In the Mood for Love by Wang Gawai, or in Chinese it would be 花样年华, and also Crazy Rich Asian movies. You will hear the Chinese Shanghai Jazz over there. So NPR has an article about Shanghai Jazz. If you're interested in that, Google that and go read the article. It's very interesting. I can play some Shanghai Jazz here now if you're interested. Okay, this song is called Can't Get Your Love, Shanghai Jazz. 你不给我一颗痴心，像黑夜里头找不到的踪影。Okay, how's that? I'm gonna play another song. It's called The Evening Primrose, which in Chinese it's called 夜来香. Okay, I wanted to listen to the whole song, but I think we needed to pay attention to the time, so I'm gonna keep doing this talking, okay? I hope you don't mind. But anyway, go on NPR, go search NPR Shanghai Jazz, and you would learn more about Shanghai Jazz history and some songs. So now I've talked about China and Shanghai and history and how Shanghai was like under the Japanese occupation. And now I'm going to take you to Europe. So we're going to have a brief review of what happened before 1940, in 1938, and 1939. So we all know in July 1938, at the Evian Conference, 32 countries, including the US, Britain, France, Canada, Australia, and others, declined to provide shelter to Jews facing relentless pogrom in Germany and Austria. And in November 1938, many Jews were arrested or murdered during the Kristallnacht, and they were ordered to leave the country. But few foreign consulates in Germany would issue them exit visas. Dr. Hoffenschang, he was the consul general of the Republic of China in Vienna. He saw the plight of the Jews, and he issued exit visas to many Jews. And because of that, about 18,000 Jews received exit visas, left Germany, and found the way to Shanghai. And you know, in September 1938, World War II broke out. And this is the part is going to be about the Jewish refugees in Shanghai. So here on this picture, this picture shows the arrival of Jewish refugees from Austria in Shanghai, and the refugees are disembarking from the Italian ship Conte Verde, and the picture was taken on December 14th, 1938. And the picture under that shows a Jewish girl holding her bag, playing with her Chinese friends in Shanghai ghetto during World War II. And this plaque over there was attached to a building where many Jewish refugees lived in Shanghai. One of them was Michael Blumenthal, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury of Carter government. So when I was writing this book, and after the book was finished, some writer friends also reached out to me, and they were telling me, hey, my grandmother was from Shanghai, and my great-grandmother was from Shanghai. I was so surprised to hear that. And one of the authors told me her grandmother was from Shanghai, and her name is called Pam Janoff. So now we're gonna go to the history after Pearl Harbor. You know, 2 days ago, December 7th, was the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And in Shanghai, people really usually don't talk about what happened to Shanghai after Pearl Harbor. But in fact, Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked Shanghai before Pearl Harbor. So we know on December 7th, 1941, at 7:49 a.m., the Japanese aero commander ordered the attack on Pearl Harbor. But Japanese attacked the settlement around 4 o'clock on December 7th, 1941, and they attacked all the citizens, foreign citizens, that Americans and Japanese in the settlement on the same day, and they took over the territory on December 7th, 1941. After they took over the settlement, the Japanese arrested all foreign nationals, such as the Americans, the British, and the Dutch, and sent them to 5 camps in Shanghai. I remember the camps that I showed you earlier on the other side on Putong. That was one of the camps. After that, the Japanese designed a special area known as the Restricted Area for Stateless Refugees in Hong Kong, sending all Jews who arrived in Shanghai from 1938 to 1941 to the ghetto. So now do you remember the Star of David, that area that I marked earlier? So this part of history was written into a novel called Empire of the Sun by J.G. Ballard, and he was one of the British people got arrested and sent to a camp in Shanghai. But his camp was not the Putong camp, it was the one in the south. So back to when my friend asked me to write about Jews in Shanghai. I did some thinking, and the first thing that appeared in my mind was it had to be a love story. And it had to be a love story between a Chinese woman and a German Jewish refugee who fled Nazi Germany. And definitely it had to be a love story that transcends race, class, tradition, religion, and war. And I had this idea that I must give each character equal weight and tell Shanghai, tell their part of history through their own narratives. So the female character will reveal Chinese tradition and customs, and the male character will relate the Jewish refugees' plight. So therefore the story has to be written in two perspectives, one female and one male. So how did I come up with the character Ai, Shao Ai, a nightclub owner from a prominent family in Shanghai? I wanted to create a counterpart of Sassoon, a businesswoman, a capable rival. And I'm drawn to create refreshing, strong, but flawed Chinese women who have claimed a place in history in their own light. And I have no intention of recycling stereotypical Chinese women. It's very important to me that I will portray Chinese women steeped in the culture and describe them in an empathetic light that will reveal the strength and the weaknesses. And it's also important to me that these women are from different fields, like business or science, or domestic or politics, and they will reflect the dynamic Asian women in reality. So when readers read my novels, they will get a sense that Chinese women in fiction are diverse. And seriously, I'm very tired of reading novels in which women were just maids or courtesans or obedient wives who were forced to commit suicide. And similarly, I'm also interested in creating memorable Chinese male characters. They are multidimensional, distinct, but flawed in some way. I'm usually turned off by those portraits like perfidious Asian men or subservient add-ons. I think those images are kind of dated and inspiring. So, Ai Yisha was inspired by the real figure, historical figure Ai Yisheng. She was the first female entrepreneur in China, and she was the daughter of Sheng Xuanhuai, known as the father of the Chinese industry. She was also the manager of Bailemen Paramount Nightclub, the first luxury nightclub in Shanghai. So this is the picture of Paramount Nightclub. Bailemen in Chinese means the gate of 100 pleasures, and it was opened in 1933. So in 1933, even in US, women were not encouraged to work outside, to get a job. It was discouraged in China as well. So as first female entrepreneur, I faced many prejudice. So I wrote that in the last rose of Shanghai. And in the novel, when Ai was talking to the documentarian, she interviewed and she said, in Shanghai, if you're a woman and a business owner, you cannot climb through a tunnel of spiders without catching some cobwebs in your hair. I guess that was her perception of being a business woman in Shanghai in 1940s. So, how did I create the character of Ernest Weissman? His first name came from Ernest Hepner, the author of Shanghai Refuge. I loved the memoir very much, and I read it many times. For some mysterious reason, I kept losing the copy of his memoir. So each time I lost it, I would just get another copy. By the end, I ended up with 5 copies of Shanghai Refuge. So, because I was the nightclub owner, so I thought Ernest Weissman had to be a musician. And since I love the piano, so Ernest would be a pianist. And when he arrived in Shanghai, he would turn himself into a jazz player. Through Ernest, I was able to weave the theme of music in the novel, because in my opinion, music is the ultimate beauty that binds everyone, whether you are an immigrant or refugee or a woman. This might be personal, but a month ago I went to my daughter's concert at Lexington High School. That was the first concert I attended in 2 years. It was also the first concert that those kids got to play on the stage. And I believe there was also a concert for many parents in the auditorium. And it just made me feel very emotional when Bach's fugue ran out in the auditorium, just to think about what we've been going through in 2 years. So for the entire concert, I just cried to the end. So, well, anyway, that's my point, trying to make about the power of music. Ernest Weissman he is the embodiment of resilience in my mind. I'm not supposed to pick favorites, but I would say he is one of the best male characters I've ever created. When he was in Berlin, a Nazi knocked him down. He got up. In China, Shanghai knocked him down, and he got up. And then war, the Japanese knocked him down. He got up. And the family knocked him down. I cannot tell you. You have to read it and see if he got up. Okay, and that's a wrap.
Wonderful. Thank you, Weina.
You're welcome.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to put it in chat. In the meantime, I'm just going to kind of enter the information I referred to earlier, the evaluation form, if you're interested in purchasing a book and receiving a signed book plate. So if you have any questions, feel free to put in chat. Weina, you've woven so much history into your book, and it's written in with such beautiful detail. Were you always a creative child? What inspired you to write?
I would say I always wanted to be a writer, dreamed to be an author, a fiction writer since I was in 3rd grade. And it sounds crazy, but I tried to write a novel when I was in third grade, but of course it didn't work out. But in fifth grade, I published my first short story, and that was very exciting for me. And after that, I always thought I could write something, make up stories, and find some interesting subject and interesting stories to tell.
And that you did. And how long did it take you to write this particular novel? And what resources did you use to gather your research?
For the last Rose of Shanghai, it took me 3 years and 6 months to write it. I started it in February 2018 and wrapped it up in July this year. Usually, though, I think that's pretty fast, 3 year and a half, honestly.
Yeah.
Because my first book, it took me like 10 years to write it. But that included a lot of years of learning about the craft and fiction writing and everything. In general, though, it would take me about 3 years, I think, to write a novel. For novels, I like to do research, read, and if I choose a subject for especially Shanghai in 1940, World War II, I I read everything that I can find. Posters, pictures, newspapers, and movies. Also movies, yeah, movies were very helpful. And usually I also read a lot of memoirs, especially by Jewish refugees who went through it. It was an eye opener, and it always helped me to see the world through their eyes. Yeah.
Great. And so that's probably a technique in which to help you if you get writer's block to continue to do more research. Are there some other interesting techniques you'd like to share?
um, so Helen, interesting techniques. I think everybody has different ideas when they wanted to relax and try to unwind. For me, I like to go around and just walk from here to there, and usually, oh, Helen, I just see questions over there. Sorry, I'm getting distracted.
Sure. Mhm.
Usually for me, it's just a matter of take a break because for me, my mind works like continuously for hours. Then afterwards, I would tell myself it's time to take a break. It's time to listen to kids, to listen to my husband, and it's time to just get myself out of this story world. Then usually when I do that, it will help. And if I really stuck, I will start to read, and I will get like 10 books from the library, and I start to read here and there. They always help. Reading always helps me. Sometimes it's just one word in the book, spark, and then I will say, hey, I can do this in my book. And then usually it's things like that. Woo, serendipity. Nice.
Great. That's wonderful. Just a couple of comments. Carla said that she enjoyed the chat so much. She loved the
Oh,
book. And
thank you.
Effie said she just started reading your book and was immediately pulled into the story and the characters. Your historical review this evening was very informative in helping to understand the story. She said, thank you.
Oh,
And Carla also said, what is next, Weina?
okay, Carla, thank you so much for coming, by the way. I recognize your name, and I'm so happy you enjoy reading The Last Rose of Shanghai. And your review means so much to me, and your support and all the readers' support means so much to me. What's next? I'm writing another novel that's also about Chinese and Chinese American and the Jews, but it's set in Vienna. It's not in Shanghai. This is kind of hard for me because I really wanted to go to Vienna in case I finish the novel and people say, hey, how could you write a novel and you've never been to the city? I really want to go, but I can't because of the pandemic. They are in lockdown. So it's hard.
Do you have any last bit of advice to give to an aspiring writer?
Okay, yeah. I know writing a novel is not for the faint of heart. And when you start the novel, it's very difficult um, to receive support from your family or even your friends. That was like that in my case. My parents could never understand why I would not be a doctor or an attorney or somebody who can actually get a steady income working in an office and get a job so I would be able to support myself. And they never understand that. So it's, I guess, if you decide this is what you're gonna do, you have to be single-minded and stubborn and know this is what you're gonna do and you will do it. But you also need to be prepared. You are walking down a very difficult path and you have to be prepared for some dark moments and depression, rejection, and silence. That's the worst part. It's just silence. You don't know how other people think of your work, and you have to figure out how to fix your problem, and you have to understand rejection is kind of important for your own growth too. I when I was writing The Moon in the Palace, I was pitching it to the agents. I received 82 rejection letters from agents. Each rejection was like, oh, but I eventually understood that rejection is a very important part of your growth, and it's important. It's kind of a part of life too, you know. I still got rejections from editors and agents with The Last Rose of Shanghai, but now it's published. So, yes, my advice for you if you want to write a novel is be determined and be prepared.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much. And I wish you much success with The Last Rose of Shanghai. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you again, Weina. Everyone have a wonderful evening.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Carla. And thank you, Helen. And thank you, Carrie Library, for having me.